Fox Business Alert, the U.S.-Iran ceasefire is set to expire tomorrow night. That deadline, though, may be in flux. You never know with this situation as of this hour. And despite President Trump's renewed threat to, quote, knock out every single power plant and bridge in Iran, Iran has shown no sign it's interested in meeting with the U.S. delegation in Pakistan tomorrow to negotiate an end to the war. But moments ago, Iran's foreign minister did say in a statement that U.S., quote, continued violations of ceasefire are a major obstacle in the diplomatic process. This, as CENTCOM announced, U.S. forces seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman for briefing the naval blockade. You're looking at CENTCOM video of Marines yesterday rappelling onto that Iranian cargo ship before seizing it, and the warning U.S. forces gave before firing on the vessel. You'll hear it here.
Vessel Toska, Motor Vessel Toska, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
Those shots did disable the engines of that ship. With the U.S.-Iran negotiations in peril, ship traffic in the Strait of Hormuz down to a trickle today, and mere hours remaining until the ceasefire expires, what are the next diplomatic and military steps? Joining me now live, retired General Joseph Votel. He oversaw U.S. operations across the Middle East as commander of Central Command from 2016 to 2019 and is now a distinguished military fellow at the Mideast Institute. Thank you for joining us, General. What needs do the U.S. need to do in the 30 or so hours before this deadline supposedly expires to make sure that the Iranians get the right message? Because at the moment, they are standing strong against coming to the talks.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be with you. Well, I think right now, from a military standpoint, I think we need to continue to do exactly what we're doing. I mean, what we just saw with this operation yesterday to seize this ship, I think was a very professional execution by the United States Navy to enforce the instructions from the commander-in-chief to establish a blockade. And that's important, I think, to continue to send a message to the Iranian regime that we are very, very serious about that. Of course, the military component of this is really only one part of the solution. The next part, of course, is the more important aspect, and that's our diplomats who are going to, led by the vice president, who are actually hopefully going to meet with the Iranians to begin to address the underlying issues that have to be resolved.
Well, how much more serious could President Trump be? I mean, it's pretty serious when he says that he is going to blow up Iranian bridges and energy infrastructure. He has said that a couple of times. He's mused about seizing Karg Island. There are those smaller islands right in the Strait of Hormuz that have been talked about as a possible potential for taking control by U.S. military. Does action at some point need to be first versus the talk? Because at the moment, as we said, the Iranians are not doing much and they are still holding up the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, well, I think this is certainly kind of the art and science of our strategy right now, and it's with the president, the administration is being very deliberative. Our military is being very deliberative with the things we're doing. So certainly we can do things that would ramp up the pressure on this. But I think it's really important to make sure if we choose to do some things, whether it's to put forces on one of these islands or to do something else that attempts to punish them, that is very closely linked to our negotiating strategy. I think what's really important right now is to make sure those two things are really closely in line with each other.
Iran has, by causing such mayhem in the Strait of Hormuz, basically upended global oil supply. That's the issue. I think the supply there, it's not the production. We've got the most production of any country here in the United States, but the global supply is enough to really disrupt the whole sort of picture there. If you were head of CENTCOM right now, what is the number one thing that you would be doing?
Well, first and foremost, we would be executing the orders that were passed to us by the commander-in-chief, which appears what they're doing. But I think it's important that while we are enforcing the blockade, that we are also working very hard to open up an alternative route. We saw the Navy take some action last week, and there's not much discussion about that right now in the open media. But I think being prepared to do both of those things at the same time, I think, is very important, because I think it does give us options
You're talking about
for commercial vessels. It certainly gives us options for our negotiating strategy.
Are you talking about naval vessels helping along other ships and making sure that they are accompanying them to safety through that choke point?
Yeah, perhaps, but even what's more important right now is actually clearing a route that can be used, and that's, I think, going to take a little bit of time. And then, of course, we have to build confidence with the commercial industry, and then we can talk about how they actually get through that. But I think pursuing both of these things at the same time is important for us to do right now.
Here's one problem that nobody in the military can control, and that is that America is a democratic society and Iran is not. It's run by despots, and President Trump is acutely attuned and sensitive to the price of gasoline, which has gone from $2 and change to now $4. He cares about the American people. He knows that sometimes they vote with their pocketbook, and if they're spending more on energy, this is a huge problem. The mullahs don't care about their own people. They don't care that their people have no fuel or that they have very little food. And so therefore, it feels like the United States is almost hemmed in a little bit more tightly and has to deal with issues because we do care about our people. So how do you square that with military action?
Well, I think you're exactly right. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the regime, or the remnants of the regime, are literally fighting for their own survival. It's not a popular government, of course, in Iran. But I think what we do as a military is that we maintain a high level of readiness, and we are ready to execute military operations that are designed to ramp up the pressure on the Iranian regime and continue to give our negotiating team the maximum amount of flexibility. So I think what's really critical for military forces right now, even though we're doing this blockade, we're trying to open a route here, is we've got to maintain our flexibility and our readiness to respond to a developing situation, to continue to hold the regime at risk.
I saw you speak at the Middle East Institute, I want to say about a year ago, maybe it was less, and none of this had happened, but you were warning about all of this potential in Iran. We appreciate your service, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thanks, General.